Okay, so now we're moving in on the first 8 of our nodes. We're gonna be solving by taking square roots. Now my instructions will say, leave your answers in simplest radical form. Okay, I'm gonna talk about what does that mean. So here, I have an equation. An equation is basically anything that there's an equal sign in there. So I do see an equal sign there. So it is an equation, and I'm gonna solve. Interesting part is that I only see one of my terms has a letter, v squared. I'm going to separate my size through the equal sign, and I want the letter by itself. So in this case, I want b squared by itself. That minus 9, I'm going to get rid of it. I'm going to move it to the other side with the opposite sign. So I know the opposite of minus is plus. So my minus 9, let me move it to the other side as a plus 9. So I have that b squared is equal to 36. Right? 27 plus 9 is 36. Now, I still want the b by itself. I don't have it yet. Now, what I'm going to do is the opposite of a square. I know the opposite of a minus was a plus. I know the opposite of times is divide. But the opposite of a squared, the opposite of an exponent, it's a root. We call this, I'm going to write this symbol. We call this a radical symbol. But for today, I'm going to be dealing with square root radical. So the root will be 2. Later on, in a few years, you guys will learn, well, actually next year, you guys will learn what if it's not root 2? What if it's root 3, root 4, root 5, like all the roots. Right now, we're going to call it root 2. So we usually call that square root. So b, for right now, let me just write b is the square root of 36. Now I'm looking for the numbered. I'm not quite done yet. I'm looking for the numbered. The multiplied gives me 36. So multiplied by itself equals 36. There are some perfect squares. So there are cases where I can think of a whole number. In this case, I could think of a negative 6, right? Because negative 6 times negative 6 gives me 36. Another number I can think of is positive 6. Because positive 6 times positive 6 gives me 36. So the square root of 36 has 2 answers, right? A number multiplied by itself equals 36. I can think of negative 6 or positive 6. Those 2 are going to be my answers. So that's it. Negative 6, positive 6. I know there's 2 answers. There's a negative, there's a positive. Make sure for us to have the same answer, make sure when you guys type it in, make sure you write the negative number first. So negative 6 and the positive 6. Another thing I want to emphasize when you're typing in your work, there is a space after the comma. So negative 6, comma, space 6. So again, I have a negative number, I have a positive number, and I have a space after the comma. The only number, and you might run into it, the only number that doesn't have a negative or positive is 0. If my answer was 0, that's the number I can think of only, just 0. Right? 0 is the only number that does not have a negative and positive. It's just 0. So there's no such thing as a negative 0. All right, let's take a look at question number 2. Let me get the k squared by itself. Let me separate my size through the equal sign. I want to have the k by itself. So the plus 2, I'm going to move it to the other side as a minus 2. I know plus and minus are opposite operations. So I moved it to the other side as a minus 2. So that gives me that k squared. It's equal to 9, right? 11 minus 2 is 9. I want k by itself, not k squared. I want k by itself. So the way I'm going to undo an exponent is with a radical, which we're going to call square root. So I'm going to have that k, that's how I get the k by itself, is equal to the square root of 9. All right, so now, again, I'm starting to think, all right, 2 numbers Well, actually, let me start thinking. At least a number that multiplied by itself will give me 9. Right? The square root of 9 is basically a number that multiplied by itself is equal to 9. One number that comes to my head is -3, because -3 times -3 is equal to 9. Another number that comes to my head is +3, because 3 multiplied by itself gives me 9. I have two answers, a negative and a positive. Make sure you type both. So, matter of fact, to remind you that there's two of them, your instructions will say leave your answers. So there's more than one. Leave your answers in simplest radical form. Don't forget, again, let me emphasize, there is a space after the comma. So my answer is -3, +3, but don't forget the space after the comma. Okay. Hoping everything seems pretty simple so far. Let me take a look at question number 3. So I'm gonna separate my sides through the equal sign. My +6, I wanna have but my v by itself. So the +6, I'm gonna move it to the other side as a -6, right? Opposite operation. So I'm gonna go v squared is equal to 10, because 16 minus 6 gives me 10. So that means that v, because I have to do radicals, I'm gonna say v is equal to the square root of 10. Now, when I start thinking, all right, the square root of 10, give a number that is equal to 10 when I multiply by itself, I know 3 is too small, and I know 4 is too big, right? Because 3 squared is less than 10, 4 squared is more than 10, but I'm not going to ask you for decimals. I know if I type it on my calculator, it will give me a decimal. But the instructions will say, leave your answer in simplest radical form. Okay, so now, what does that mean? I know perfect squares. Perfect squares are like the square root of 4, the square root of 9, the square root of 16, the square root of 25, the square root of 36, and more, right? Perfect squares are those numbers, those radicals that I can think of a number that multiplied by itself gives me that, right? The square root of 40 is 2. So, matter of fact, I'll even write it. The square root of 9 is 3. The square root of 16, I know, is 4. The square root of 25 is 5. The square root of 36 is 6, right? I can think of a number that multiplied by itself gives me that. Now, square root of 10 is not a perfect square. So I will be able to simplify it. So I will be able to simplify it if I can split 10 as two numbers. So two numbers that multiplied equals 10, but one of them has to come from my perfect squares here. So again, I'll be able to simplify if I can split 10 as two numbers that multiplied equals 10, but one of my numbers has to be from the perfect squares. In this case, I cannot. I cannot split 10. We can think of 2 times 5. Yeah, 2 times 5 equals 10, but neither the 2 nor the 5 are a perfect square. Like I said, I'll be able to simplify it if one of my numbers is a perfect square. So I cannot simplify. So my answer will be negative square root of 10 and positive square root of 10. Because I have to have a negative and a positive answer. Now, how am I going to type this? I'm going to go the negative sign. And then square root of 10, we're going to write that as SQRT, parentheses, and the 10 on the inside. So that's negative square root of 10. Don't forget the parentheses. All right, so my comma. My other number, positive square root of 10, I'm just going to write SQRT. That means square root, open parentheses, 10, close parentheses. Right? Square root of 10, I was not able to simplify. Sometimes I will be able to simplify some, but this time I was not able to. So I just have negative square root of 10 and positive square root of 10. All right, let's take a look at another similar example. I want the letter by itself. So I want X by itself. So first thing I do is, let me separate my sides. There's a 2 at the very front. I want to get rid of it. Now I want to cancel the 2. But in order for me to cancel a 2 there, I have to move it to the other side as a divide by 2. In this case, I'm dividing because that 2 at the front was multiplied. The opposite of multiplying is divide. So that gives me that X squared, it's equal to 61. Right, 122 divided by 2 is 61. And then I'm thinking, all right, can I possibly simplify this? And I cannot. When I mean with can I possibly simplify, because I know that X is going to give me the square root of 61. And again, what I mean with simplify, remembering my perfect squares, square root of 4, square root of 9, square root of 16, square root of 25, 36, 49, 64, all those. Can I split 61? Can I think of two numbers that multiplied equals 61, but one of them is from my perfect square? And I cannot. So my answer will be, let me write this first. It will be negative square root of 61 and positive square root of 61. If I was writing it, if this was on paper, that will be my answer. Now, the way I'm going to type this will be negative SQRT. That's for negative square root of 61, comma, SQRT. That means square root of 61. Don't forget to open and close parentheses. Notice my 61, I put it inside parentheses. So negative square root of 61, positive square root of 61. Let me take a look at question number 5. I'm going to work up until number 8. Now, let me separate my sides through the equal sign. There's two numbers on the side where there's the B. There's a negative 5 and there's a positive 4. Have to get rid of both of them, one at a time. First thing, I'm going to get rid of the number that is not with the letter. So the minus 5, I'm going to get rid of it by moving it to the other side as a plus 5. Right, I'm going to move it as the opposite side. So that gives me the 4b squared is equal to 36, right? 31 plus 5 is 36. Have a question is like, do we have to write it? The answer is the SQRT every time. If you can't simplify it, yes. If you cannot simplify it, yes. All right. Again, I'm trying to get the b squared by itself. There's a 4 in front of it. Right now it's 4 times b squared. So when I'm going to get rid of that 4, let me divide, because the opposite of times is divide. So let me divide. So that gives me that b squared is equal to 9. Right? 36 divided by 4 is 9. The way I'm going to undo the squared, I'm going to do it with square root. So that gives me that b is equal to the square root of 9. All right, if I can think of a number multiplied by itself gives me 9, that's it. I can think of a negative 3, right? Negative 3 times negative 3 is 9. But I can also think of positive 3. Again, I have a negative and a positive answer. Don't forget that there's a space. Let me emphasize, there's a space after the comma. So my answers are negative 3, positive 3. Do expect to have two answers all the time, a negative and a positive. The only time when you don't have a negative and a positive is when your answer is 0. There's no such thing as a negative 0. That's the only time when you don't have a negative and a positive answer. Otherwise, you do have a negative and a positive answer. All right, let's take a look at question number 6. We separate them through the equal sign. So my plus 2, let me move it over as a minus 2. So that gives me that 16n squared is equal to 4. Let me divide by 16. So that gives me that n squared. I have 4 divided by 16. That will give me a decimal, but I can simplify a little as 1 over 4. We know how to simplify fractions. 4 over 16, divide each number by the same thing, by the same number. In this case, I divided each by 4. That's how I got 1 over 4. So n squared is equal to 1 over 4. Now let me write in red here at the side. So n have to get the square root of everything. Whew, okay, so n is going to be the square root of 1 over the square root of 4. Okay, I know the square root of 1 is 1, right? A number multiplied by itself gives me 1 is 1. The square root of 4 is 2. So for right now, let me just write positive or negative because I know I have a positive and a negative answer. Positive or negative 1 over 2. Right? The square root of 1 was 1. The square root of 4 is 2. I was able to simplify each of my square roots. Now, how am I going to type this? I'm going to go, we always type the negative sign because the negative answer, because that's smaller. So I'm going to type this as negative 1 over 2. Notice I'm using the backslash for fraction. So negative 1/2, comma, there's a space, positive 1 over 2. Don't have to write the positive sign. So those are my answers. It is okay to have fractions. So there we have an example with fractions. All right, let's take a look at number 7. Numbers are going to get a little bit bigger now. Let me separate them through the equal sign. This minus 8, let me move it to the other side as a plus 8, thinking opposite operation. So 8x squared is equal to 760. Right, 752 plus 8, 760. Let me divide both sides by 8. So that gives me that x squared is equal to 95. 760 divided by 8 is 95. Use a calculator if you need to. So that means that x is the square root of 95. Okay, so 95, I know my perfect squares. Square root of 4, square root of 9, square root of 16, square root of 25. I'm hoping that I can think of, all right, two numbers, thinking if I can simplify my radical, two numbers that multiplied equals 95, one of them has to be from my perfect squares. The only two numbers I can think of that multiplied equals 95 are 5 times 19. 5 is not from my perfect squares. 19 is not from my perfect squares. So I cannot simplify it anymore. So I'm going to say, all right, my answers, I know I have to have a positive and a negative. So I'm just going to write negative square root of 95 and positive square root of 95. Remember, square roots, we write it at SQRT. Don't forget to open and close parentheses. So negative square root of 95, positive square root of 95. Let's take a look at one more example. Separate them through the equal sign. My plus 4, let me move this as a minus 4. So I have the 6x squared is equal to 486. right? 490 minus 4 is 486. Now to get the x squared by itself, let me divide both sides by 6. So I get that x squared is equal to 81. 486 divided by 6 is 81. So that means that x is going to be the square root of 81. The opposite of a squared exponent is a square root. The opposite of an exponent is a radical, right? It's a root. Now, square root of 81, that simplifies to a whole number. So I'm thinking, all right, a number multiplied by 8 by itself equals 81. I can think of -9, because -9 times -9 is equal to 81. But I can also think of +9. You have a negative and a positive. Now, in your homework, you're going to run into some questions. Let me run some other examples. I'm going to add a couple more. How to simplify. Some questions you might run into. Let's say I have like the x is equal to square root of 200. Let me explain a little bit more how to simplify more my radicals. I know my perfect squares. Square root of 4, square root of 9, square root of 16, square root of 25. I know my perfect squares. My list goes on. Right? I have 36, 49, and more. Now, square root of 200 can be simplified a little bit more. I don't want the decimal. I'm not asking for an estimation. I'm not asking to estimate. I'm asking to simplify. Now, square root of 200 can be simplified. And when I mean simplified means I can break it down as 2 square roots. My goal is I'm thinking of 2 numbers that multiplied equals 200. It's okay for the numbers to be different. 2 numbers that multiplied are equal to 200, but one of them has to be from my perfect squares. So I'm going to say, how about 4 times 50? 4 times 50 is 200. And I know the square root of 4 is a perfect square. That's going to give me 2 square root of 50. Sometimes your radicals will simplify to part of it is a whole number and part of it is still a radical. So that simplifies for now 2 square root of 50, right? Because the square root of 4 was 2. There was nothing outside, so I just put the 2 outside. That's basically what I do. Now I can simplify probably even more. Square root of 50, I can break it as 2 radicals. 2 numbers that multiplied equals 50, I can think of 25 times 2. Because I know the square root of 25 is 5. Now, there is a number on the outside now. So this 5, when it goes outside, there's a number on the outside now. So that I'm just going to multiply those 2. So that simplifies to 10 square root of 2. So square root of 200, like say you might run into something like this. Square root of 200 simplifies to 10 square root of 2. Part of it is a whole number. Part of it is a radical. The way I will type that, I'm just writing the positive now. I'm not going to write the negative, but if I was just writing the positive, it will be 10 SQRT 2. 10 square root of 2. Let me show you guys another example how things might even simplify. Let's say I ask you guys the square root of 48. So these are extra examples. Square root of 48. I'm thinking, all right, let me think of 2 numbers that multiplied equals 48, but one of them has to be from my perfect squares. The 2 numbers that usually come to our minds are 6 times 8, but neither the 6 nor the 8 are perfect squares. So I have to think of something else. And I say, well, how about 4 times 12? 4 is a perfect square because I know the square root of 4 is 2. So square root of 48 simplifies to 2 square root of 12. And I can even do better. Square root of 12. I can break that as 4 times 3. Square root of 4 is 2. This 2 times the 2 that was outside already, that's going to give me 4 square root of 3. So some cases in your homework, you're going to have a radical, you're going to have a square root that simplifies to a whole number, simplifies to just a square root, or simplifies as a part of a whole number in square root. So you will run into that. Let me zoom out. You guys can take a picture of that.